If anyone ever asked you what Nintendo franchise has it the worst, and I don't know why anyone would ask you that question anyways, but who cares, just hear me out. You'd probably respond with the most obvious. Star Fox, Punch Out, Excite Bike, Earthbound, freaking Wario Land, and while those are definitely a good majority of often forgotten Nintendo franchises that hasn't received a new entry in at least 5 years or longer, some of the ones that haven't received a new entry in 5 years or longer are just starting to see a resurgence today. The Metroid series came back in October 2021 with Metroid Dread after the series took a bit of a break after the masterpiece that was 2016's Metroid Prime Federation Force. I'm sleeping good tonight, don't you worry. And Pikmin 4 was announced back in September 2022 and is being released in July, the first new Pikmin game we've had since Pikmin 3 in 2013 on the Wii U, Hey Pikmin on the 3DS in 2017, and Pikmin 3 Deluxe on the Nintendo Switch in October 2020, which I don't count because it's just a port of an older game. So the possibility of Nintendo revitalizing some of their more dormant franchises is pretty high. But then you have Nintendo franchises that you can't say for certain whether they'll get another game again, and then you have some that you know for a fact that Nintendo will never bring back. Aside from the 2018 Switch port of Tropical Freeze, the Donkey Kong Country series hasn't gotten a new entry in quite some time, since 2014 actually. It doesn't seem like Nintendo has any interest in discontinuing the franchise. I mean, Retro Studios is the company behind this series. Well, the more recent ones at least. Not to mention that they've had their hands full with making Metroid Prime 4 over the past 4 years, and I do believe that once they wrap that up, there might be a chance that they could start work on a new Donkey Kong Country, or who knows, maybe it's already knee deep into development and we just don't know it yet. Punch Out actually hasn't been getting any new games lately, with the last one being Punch Out Wii in 2009. Never really played that one, but I have played both the NES and SNES originals, and they're tons of fun. And just by seeing gameplay of the Wii version makes it seem like a game like that would work really well on systems like the Nintendo Switch. But considering how we haven't had a new game in over 10 years aside from re-releases of older games, it seems Nintendo and the team behind this series, Next Level Games, probably doesn't have any plans to bring this series back unless they pull a Mario Strikers Battle League on us, and just the thought of doing something like that makes me mad. Even franchises like Star Fox makes you question whether or not Nintendo wants to continue the series after the backlash that came from the latest game released in 2016, Star Fox Zero on the Wii U. The closest thing we've had to Star Fox since then was getting an appearance in the Switch version of 2018 Starlink Battle for Atlas, but come on. Does that really count? Now, I don't want to jump to conclusions and just automatically say that these franchises are dead because, again, the latest entry was only released 7 years ago. Same with Donkey Kong Country, except the last game for that came out 9 years ago. But I feel because these franchises haven't gotten a new entry in some time, and hell, some of them haven't even gotten a new entry on the Switch entirely, it really makes you think. Again, I don't want to jump to conclusions here. I mean, there might be a chance that just because it hasn't gotten a new entry now doesn't mean we'll never get one eventually. I mean, that is what happened with Metroid. But you can't mention dormant Nintendo franchises without bringing up, oh man, we're talking about that today. Now I have to cancel my plans! F-Zero, Nintendo's old racing franchise that got its debut as a launch title for the Super Nintendo in 1990 in Japan and 1991 here in North America. And the franchise has kept at it until the early 2000s. It's just that after that, yeah, not much really happened. The main character from the F-Zero games, Captain Falcon, has been a playable fighter throughout the entire Super Smash Bros. Series, and that's about it. It's pretty ironic to me that most people only know what F-Zero is because of Captain Falcon's appearance in Smash. But in the original Super Nintendo game, we don't even see him at all, as he never leaves his vehicle at all. Anyone else find that bizarre? Now, my history with the F-Zero franchise doesn't go back very far. I wasn't born during the height of its popularity, and I didn't own any of the systems it was on. I really only started when I played the original Super Nintendo game on the Super Nintendo mini console in September 2017, and eventually when SNES games made it over to Nintendo Switch Online 2 years later. But all the other entries that released after, however, I never really experienced. I mainly hear the reason why F-Zero hasn't been getting a new entry in a long time is due to the lack of ideas, which just puzzles me. It's a futuristic racing series where you're driving super fast in a futuristic world. The only ideas you need are just to make new tracks and racers in said world. Though keep in mind, I am not a game developer, so there could be more to the story than just that. I don't really know. But still, seeing how well received the series is, it's shocking that Nintendo discontinued it a little over 10 years after the series even began. Now, while the lack of ideas is definitely a possibility, I think a big factor as to why this series is no longer around is because of Mario Kart. To be honest, I never really saw the harm of having two racing franchises coincide with each other. I mean, hell, that's exactly what happened with both franchises for a while. Maybe it has something to do with sales, I couldn't really say. But over time, however, Mario Kart eventually started evolving more as a franchise, meanwhile F-Zero over here just faded into nothingness without a second thought, never to see the light of day again. It's fine, Mario Kart was better anyways. But today, I was interested in taking a look at the original F-Zero for the Super Nintendo, casually just taking a retrospective look at it and seeing whether it's still fun in the modern era despite being over 30 years old. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the very first game in the F-Zero franchise. Why can't all games start like this? So this is the game's title screen, and we have two options here, Grand Prix or Practice. We'll get to Practice in due time, don't you worry, but come on, can you blame me? Anyone who plays a racing game for the first time needs to start off with the Grand Prix. Man, I'm already opinionated and I haven't even started playing the game yet. But one thing I do notice on the title screen right off the bat is that there's no option for multiplayer in sight. Why? Well, to put it bluntly, that's because this game doesn't have multiplayer. Huh? That is just straight up bizarre. I mean, yeah, I know this is a game from 1991 that was probably designed to be a technical showcase for the Super Nintendo to compete with Sega's 16-bit Genesis console more than anything. But Super Mario Kart only came out 1 year later, and it had multiplayer. And not the so-called multiplayer where you alternate your controller to the person next to you, but split-screen simultaneous multiplayer. So I'm not necessarily sure what this game's excuse was. Though I will say though, it does make loneliness a good selling point. Can't say that about Mario Kart. Now, when we finally get to the vehicle selection screen, we have all these different vehicles to choose from. There's the Blue Falcon, the Golden Fox, Wild Goose, and Fire Stingray. Whoever gave these vehicles their names deserves a raise. And they're not just different aesthetically either, they all have their own unique stats with the max power unit, max power weight, all that. I usually go with the traditional Blue Falcon just because that's the first one that comes up, and I don't know, its stats are fine too, I guess. Usually for racing games, I never really care about stats all that much when it comes to the vehicles because it usually just narrows down to, oh, this one's kinda cool, or holy crap, they got Mercedes in on this? 10 out of 10 game. Not to mention, I don't really think they make that much of a difference either. So stats, I don't really care. Now of course, there's also the different leagues here being Knight, Queen, and King, which represents the cups for the Grand Prix with 5 different tracks found within, and each race lasting a solid 5 laps compared to pretty much every Mario Kart race lasting only 3. The difficulty here could also be selected between the options Beginner, Standard, or Expert. Though you will need to unlock them, however, but I never did. But now, on to the race. So F-Zero and some other games on the Super Nintendo has this feature called Mode 7, which pretty much takes the background in games and offers a sense of depth with it. That's why the tracks here are, well, tracks, and not just elements that are simply a part of the background. Other games such as Super Mario Kart and even Pilot Wings has Mode 7, and while it's a pretty impressive feat running on the Super Nintendo, I'd say Mode 7 is at its finest with racing games like this. Now, like I said earlier, F-Zero is a blazing fast, futuristic racing game all about just being fast and futuristic, and all the various tracks here do a solid job conveying the futuristic look. However though, while the tracks themselves are designed okay, I found that making sharp turns are a bit harder to do on them because of the speed where I just constantly crashed into a wall during the race, but I don't know, that might just be because I'm not very good. The game will even show you the speed you're traveling at and how long you've been racing for. And because this is a racing game, the game will even show you what place you're in, or rank as it's called here. There's also a life system here too, functioning very similarly to pretty much every game that has a life system. Rank anywhere below a third place, you lose a life. And once you lose all 3 lives, you have to restart the entire league from the beginning. And thank goodness too, because I was hoping to find an excuse to hate this game. Took me long enough. And while the life system is pretty much unheard of for standard racing games like this, F-Zero also has something that a lot of racing games at the time didn't have. Not just a life system, but a meter on top of that. It's pretty similar to the one found in Excitebike, though it operates very differently. With that, it was just something where if you were driving faster than usual for a long period of time, it would fill up and you'd have to wait a couple seconds before going back to driving. But here, it's basically a health bar. Hit a wall, it'll decrease. Bump into other racers, it'll decrease. Accidentally fly off the track by using these ramps, it automatically gets empty. And once the meter gets empty, it's game over. You lose. Well, that was to the point. Now, the meter isn't really anything special, to be honest, but I can appreciate the developers doing something a little different for an early 90s racing title. Though it does get pretty annoying throughout the game because the tracks get way more difficult to race on as you progress, where the layout of them just makes it way easier to crash into a wall and bump into other racers. And by the time I reach the 3rd or 4th lap, the meter will pretty much be on its last legs, where one more hit will lead to a game over, and I actively have to make sure I'm not bumping into a wall or other racers, which is nearly impossible for a game like this where the racers are pretty much rubber banded to make sure you're not too far behind if you're in first place, or a million miles ahead of you if you're behind. And overall, the meter just leads to some very unfair and frustrating game overs in my opinion. Though there are specific sections found within the track that replenish a good chunkier meter for as long as you're standing on it, which does help alleviate the frustration a little bit, but it doesn't make it any less annoying though. Now, in terms of controls, it's pretty much exactly what you'd expect for a Super Nintendo game, with how you press B to accelerate and the D-pad to steer left or right. You could even steer by using the controller's shoulder buttons L and R. Why would anyone want to play like this? I don't know, but hey, if you want to put yourself through hell, at least the option's here. Now, of course, there's also a command done by pressing the A button. And I still have no clue what the hell it's supposed to do. I don't know, man. Every time I press the A button while playing this game, the car always lights up for a second, and I don't know if it's supposed to make the car move faster or if it's to indicate something, but until I figure it out, I'm leaving an IOU here. Now, I'm a bit iffy about B being used as the acceleration button, to be honest. I don't know, with how none of the other buttons do anything at all and B being right at the very bottom of the controller, it just feels awkward when I have to maneuver my thumb all the way there in order to reach it. I think it would have been more ideal having the other buttons X or Y be used instead, though with B as acceleration, I never thought it was a deal breaker or makes the game control poorly or anything. If anything, the game controls pretty well overall, and this is more of a minor complaint than anything else. I'm just saying that the other buttons would work a bit better, even if they were optional. So overall, the game controls well, which, hey, I did say the game controls exactly how you'd expect a Super Nintendo game to do so there's not much to complain about in this aspect, except maybe offer more buttons be used as the acceleration button instead of B, but it is what it is. Now, gameplay-wise, I like it. Obviously, because this is an older game, it's not perfect and is dated in many aspects, but honestly, I found the gameplay to still be quite fun and enjoyable even in the modern era. For some reason, I'm a huge fan of games that has a very arcadey feel to it, where it's mostly racing games that has that sort of feel to it. And F-Zero, despite being an older game, captures the essence of arcade-style games, and I really dig that because of it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I vastly prefer more modern arcade-feeling games than this, but I really like when games has this unique feel to it, and I don't know why. Couple that with the fact that I'm already a massive fan of the racing genre in general thanks to Mario Kart, and you have something where gameplay-wise, it's pretty good. I don't really have much to complain about in this aspect. Why am I reviewing this game again? Now, of course, there's also the killer soundtrack too, with so many great tunes all around. It does a really good job sounding very futuristic-y while also just being a great listen all around. Big Blue in particular is my personal favorite, but even when it's not Big Blue, the fast-paced and adrenaline-pumping soundtrack makes you incredibly excited for what you're about to experience. That. But now, let's turn the tables on the game and discuss something that isn't very good. The visuals. Now, of course, a plethora of older games like this, especially games that tried to be more than what they could handle, aren't always going to look so hot visually. And that goes double for Super Nintendo games, with this and Star Fox being prime examples. I mean, the sprite work on the vehicles look okay, and while the walls that are supposed to keep you from falling off a track being flat images is a bit jarring, and sometimes a little hard to avoid crashing into them because of it, it's not as difficult as it really looks. I always knew Mode 7 would be good for something, though the biggest complaint I have with the visuals are the textures. Now, they're not so bad to the point where the game is unplayable or anything like that, but so many of the textures when looking at them is honestly pretty hard on the eyes more than anything, and could even be a bit distracting at points. Now, it might just be because I was playing this on the SNES Online app on the Switch, and it probably wouldn't look as bad running on original hardware, but I couldn't care less about what kind of hardware it's running on. The subpar textures make the visuals for this game age, whether it's on original hardware or not. And yeah, I guess the obstacles like the walls and road hazards being flat are a bit tough to avoid as well, but I never personally found it to be the envy of my enjoyment with the game. For now. Now, you can't have a racing game without tracks to race on, and F-Zero has tracks alright. There's 15 found in the game, with each 5 separated into 3 different leagues, though a lot of them feel pretty similar design-wise, mainly because a good majority of them just reuse themes from other tracks just with different layouts, but there are a few in here that are unique and are their own thing, but those aren't nearly as prevalent as the ones that just reuse themes, to be honest. Now, to be fair, they all have hazards to make them stand out a bit more. Ramps so that you can fly over specific parts of the tracks or racers, dirt that slows down anyone who drives over it, and I already talked about the specific spots that replenish part of your meter, but that's really it. That's really all the hazards that this game's track selection needs, and it does help make each track more interesting to race on, but I still feel that a lot of the tracks blend in though. So now, let's go through all 15 tracks and determine whether I hate the game now because of that. This is going to go very well. Mute City, the starting track for the game, and I actually don't have much to say about this other than the fact that it's pretty fun. Nothing really all too special about it, but overall it's a nice little way to start off the Night Cup. I like it. Big Blue. To me, there's not too much that's different about Big Blue compared to Mute City design-wise, but ultimately I think I prefer this to that track with how I kind of just like the layout here a bit more overall. But you can't really go wrong with either, to be honest. Sand Ocean, the most linear feeling track so far. I didn't hate this one, but when you're driving at an incredibly fast speed and you have to make all these sharp turns while also making sure you're not crashing into the other racers or the wall, just made this one more difficult to like, honestly. Deathwind 1. Same story, felt similar to the last one, just slightly more linear. And yup, I didn't like it. Silence, the last track in the Night League. Also the first one that didn't feel like a slightly more linear version of the previous one, where this one's more unique, where I also didn't like this one a whole lot. The sharp turns that are required here are needlessly difficult to pull off, and on top of crashing into the other racers on the 3rd or 4th lap 70% of the time I race on this track, just makes this one not something I enjoyed personally. Now, there is this one section with the fork in the road, and this one part where you're using a ramp to jump over this dirt texture that'll slow you down if you drive over it. Next course, this time in the Queen League. Mute City 2. Basically take everything I said about Mute City 1 and apply it here. Boom, just saved you all 30 seconds. Don't worry, you can thank me later. Port Town 1. It follows the tradition of most of the other tracks in this game, and it is pretty good overall. Though there are these things in this one section that keeps pulling you towards the wall that are pretty annoying, but other than that, good track. Red Canyon 1. Sure. Whiteland 1. I like it. Whiteland 2. Why this is right after Whiteland 1 is beyond me, but hey, it is a good track, just like Whiteland 1, so is it even necessary for me to be complaining about this? Yeah, pretty much. Now, on to the final league, the King League, and you're probably wondering, what's the most F-Zero way to start the final league in F-Zero? By starting off with yet another version of Mute City, of course, Mute City 3. And it's a pretty good track overall. Whew, I was not expecting a twist like that. Deathwind 2. Remember Deathwind 1? It's just more of the same, except this one's actually good. Port Town 2, good track, and Red Canyon 2. Sure, Firefield, the final track in the Night League, and also the final track in the entire game too, which is great because this track is not that good. Between the constant sharp turns you have to make and these annoying things from Port Town 1, and with how easy it is to keep bumping into the other racers and your power meter decreasing constantly, it's more than a chore than anything else. Not the best way to end the final week in the game. And that's the first F-Zero. Well, actually, we're not done just yet, as we still have to check out Practice Mode. And it's exactly what it sounds like. A mode to practice your skills on any of the game's tracks with one other CPU-controlled racer, or no racers at all, pretty much acting as an early equivalent to the Time Trials mode from Mario Kart. Finally, my sanity is saved. So that was the first F-Zero on the Super Nintendo, and before I did a full playthrough of this for today, I originally thought for an early Super Nintendo game released in 1991, it was still pretty enjoyable. It was obviously very dated in many regards, but I could easily look past all that and just appreciate this game for being still quite good 30 plus years later. And after a full playthrough, I still believe that. The gameplay, while dated in many regards, is still pretty fun. The controls, while not perfect, still suffices and doesn't tamper with the overall experience at all. And while not all the tracks are winners, most of them are and are still fun to race on for the most part. Not you. Now for the negatives. While I did just say the track design is good for the most part, there's a few in there that makes me question my life choices. Sand Ocean, Silence, Deathwind 1, and Firefield are all tracks where, design-wise, I didn't really like, to be honest. And even the tracks I did like, they still had some iffy parts in them, like with Port Town 1, and with how the other ones having turns that just highlights how the speed in the game isn't accommodated very well. That stupid dumb power meter and the life system being annoying as all hell that leads to some pretty frustrating moments throughout the game, all things considered, with the visuals, specifically the textures, being quite the eyesore more than anything else. And with the baffling exclusion of multiplayer, even if the game itself is pretty old, really highlights how this game hasn't exactly gotten better with age. Though, despite all that, I still found myself really liking the game for what it is and still found the overall experience to be a pretty fun time. Even if there are some moments in there that does get in the way of that a little bit. Now, you could make the argument that I'm being overly critical of this game because I'm not very good at it, because I'm not. Wow, that is some incredible insight into how I review games. And I know the game isn't anything new, so of course, most of the complaints are mainly due to it just not aging very well. Screw this game. Oh, F-Zero overall, pretty good game once again. Though with its age kinda taking a toll on its quality a bit, it's a little hard to go back to and play today. I just think with the later entries probably being a lot better because I never played them sort of makes this game a little irrelevant and not exactly something you should immediately jump back into unless you're nostalgic for it compared to the later entries. Again, still a good game, but compare this to this. I mean, which one would you prefer? Now, it is still cool to look back on this game for kickstarting an underrated series that Nintendo kinda just discontinued out of nowhere in the early 2000s, and overall, the game still offers a great deal of fun, once again, but it's just not as good as I initially thought it would be in 2017, with the more frustrating parts of the game being much more frustrating than I initially remember. Now, is this the case because I was not playing it on original hardware and instead playing it on the SNES Online app on the Switch? Yeah, I would say so. And that's going to wrap up today's video. If you enjoyed the video, then please consider subscribing and checking out my other videos on my channel where you'll find more videos like this one. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.